The desert heat hit like a wall of fire as the SEAL team moved through the Afghan valley. Dust swirled around their boots, and the weight of their gear pressed down on tired shoulders. They had been tracking a high-value target for 3 days, moving only at night and hiding during the scorching daylight hours. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his brow as he signaled his team to take cover behind a cluster of rocks. His 8-man unit was among the best the Navy had to offer. Each member had proven themselves countless times in missions that most people would never hear about. But today felt different. Something was off. The intelligence reports had mentioned possible civilian presence in the area, but they had seen no signs of life for hours. The village they were approaching was supposed to be empty, abandoned months ago when the fighting had intensified. Morrison's instincts told him to be extra careful. As they prepared to move forward, a sharp crack echoed through the valley. Sniper fire. The team immediately dropped flat, scanning the ridgeline for the shooter's position. Morrison's heart pounded as he tried to locate the threat. They were exposed, caught in the open with nowhere to run. "Contact left. 2 o'clock," whispered Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez through his radio. "I see movement on the ridge." Before Morrison could respond, another shot rang out. This time, it found its mark. Petty Officer Sarah Chen, their communications specialist, cried out and collapsed behind a boulder. Blood seeped through her tactical vest as she pressed her hand against her shoulder. "Chen's hit," Morrison called out. "Doc, get to her now!" Hospital Corpsman, 2nd Class. Marcus Williams, known to everyone as Doc, immediately began crawling toward Chen's position. Bullets continued to rain down from the ridge, forcing the team to stay pressed against the rocky ground. The shooter had them pinned, and Chen was bleeding badly. Doc reached Chen and began assessing her wound. She was conscious but pale, her breathing shallow and rapid. The bullet had entered just below her shoulder blade and exited through the front, missing major organs but causing significant blood loss. As Doc worked to stop the bleeding, he noticed something strange. Chen wasn't making any sound. Not a groan, not a whisper, nothing. Most wounded soldiers would be crying out in pain or at least talking to their medic. But Chen lay perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the sky above. Lips pressed tightly together. "Chen, talk to me," Doc said as he applied pressure to the wound. "How's the pain? Can you move your fingers?" She nodded slightly, but remained silent. Doc had treated hundreds of wounded soldiers in his 10-year career, and this behavior was unusual. Combat stress could affect people differently, but Chen was known for being tough and vocal. She was the one who usually kept the team's spirits up with jokes and stories during long missions. Morrison and the rest of the team worked to eliminate the sniper threat while Doc continued treating Chen. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos and Petty Officer First Class Thompson flanked left to get a better angle on the shooter's position. The firefight lasted another 20 minutes before the sniper was neutralized. With the immediate threat gone, Doc could focus entirely on Chen's medical needs. As he cut away her tactical vest and shirt to better access the wound, he noticed something that made him pause. Along Chen's back and arms were faded scars, old marks that told a story of previous trauma. These weren't combat injuries from her time with the SEALs. They were different, older, and more personal. Doc had seen similar scars before, during his time working in emergency rooms before joining the Navy. These were the kind of marks left by prolonged abuse, the type of injuries that spoke of a childhood filled with pain and fear. But what struck him most was how Chen reacted to his touch as he cleaned and bandaged her wounds. She flinched at unexpected contact, even when he warned her what he was doing. As Doc worked, Chen finally spoke, but only in whispers. "Don't let them see," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please don't let them see." Doc realized she wasn't talking about her current wound. She was worried about the old scars, the evidence of whatever hell she had survived before becoming one of the most respected members of their unit. He adjusted his position to shield her from the view of other team members as he continued his treatment. "Your secret's safe with me," Doc whispered back, "but we need to talk about this later." Chen closed her eyes and nodded slightly. The pain medication Doc had given her was starting to take effect, but he could see that her silence wasn't just about the drugs. There was something deeper going on, something that connected to those old scars and her obvious discomfort with being touched. Morrison approached as Doc finished bandaging the wound. "How is she, Doc? Can she move?" "She'll be fine, but we need to get her back to base for proper medical attention," Doc replied. "The bullet went clean through, but she's lost some blood." Morrison looked down at Chen, who was now resting with her eyes closed. He had known her for 2 years, had seen her handle impossible situations with courage and determination. She was one of the best communication specialists he had ever worked with. Always reliable, always professional. But lying there, wounded and silent, she looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "Can she walk?" Morrison asked. "I think so, but I'd prefer to carry her if possible," Doc said. "She's weaker than she's letting on." The team prepared for the long journey back to their extraction point. Chen insisted she could walk, but Doc stayed close beside her, watching for signs of shock or further blood loss. As they moved through the desert, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had discovered. Sarah Chen was known throughout their unit as someone who never backed down from a fight. She had earned her place among the SEALs through incredible determination and skill. But the evidence Doc had seen suggested that her toughness came from surviving something terrible long before she ever put on a military uniform. The scars on her body told a story of survival, but her behavior suggested that the emotional wounds ran even deeper than the physical ones. Her silence, her reluctance to be touched, her desperate plea for secrecy all pointed to trauma that went far beyond what most people could imagine. As they walked through the night toward safety, Doc found himself wondering about the woman he thought he knew. Sarah Chen was a mystery, and today's injury had revealed just the beginning of a story that was much more complex and painful than anyone in their unit had ever suspected. The desert wind picked up as they moved, blowing sand across their path and covering their tracks. But Doc knew that some tracks could never be erased, and some secrets were too heavy to carry alone. Whatever Sarah Chen had survived before joining their team had shaped her into the warrior she was today, but it had also left her with wounds that might never fully heal. Behind her silence lay a story of survival that would change everything the team thought they knew about the woman who had fought beside them for years. 3 hours after the firefight, the SEAL team finally reached their extraction point. The helicopter blades churned the desert air as they loaded Chen onto a stretcher. Doc climbed in beside her, monitoring her vital signs during the flight back to their forward operating base. She had remained mostly silent throughout the journey, speaking only when absolutely necessary. At the base medical facility, Doc helped transfer Chen to a proper examination room. The field medic who took over her care was thorough and professional, but Doc noticed how Chen tensed up whenever the new medic touched her unexpectedly. She answered medical questions with simple yes or no responses, never volunteering additional information. "She's lucky," the field medic told Doc afterward. "Clean entry and exit wound. No major damage to muscles or nerves. She'll be sore for a few weeks, but she should make a full recovery." Doc nodded. But his concerns went beyond the bullet wound. After Chen was settled in the recovery ward, he requested permission to stay with her for observation. Something about her behavior during the mission troubled him deeply. That evening, as Chen slept under the influence of pain medication, Doc sat beside her bed thinking about what he had witnessed. In his years as a corpsman, he had seen many different reactions to combat injuries. Some soldiers were talkative, some were angry, others became withdrawn. But Chen's response was different. Her silence seemed protective, like a wall she had built around herself long before she ever joined the military. When Chen woke up around midnight, she found Doc reading a medical journal in the chair beside her bed. She started to sit up but winced as the movement pulled at her stitches. "Easy," Doc said softly. "The pain medication is wearing off. I can get you something stronger if you need it." Chen shook her head. "I'm fine," she whispered, her first words since arriving at the base. Doc set down his journal and leaned forward. "Chen, we need to talk about what I saw out there." Her body tensed immediately. "I don't know what you mean." "The scars," Doc said gently. "And the way you react when people touch you without warning. I've been a medic for a long time. I've seen this before." Chen closed her eyes and turned her head away. "It's not important." "It is important," Doc replied. "You're part of our team, and whatever you're carrying around is affecting how you handle situations. Today you could barely speak after being wounded. That's not normal for you." For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the quiet hum of medical equipment and distant voices from the hallway. Finally, Chen opened her eyes and looked at Doc. "You wouldn't understand," she said quietly. "Try me," Doc replied. "I've heard a lot of stories, and I'm not going anywhere." Chen stared at the ceiling for a long time before she began to speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and Doc had to lean closer to hear her words. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio," she began. "My father was a mechanic, well respected in the community. Everyone thought he was a good man, hardworking, reliable, always willing to help his neighbors." She paused, her hands gripping the bedsheets tightly. "But at home he was different. He drank heavily, and when he drank, he became violent. My mother tried to protect me and my younger brother, but she wasn't strong enough to stop him." Doc listened without interrupting, understanding that this was probably the first time Chen had ever told anyone this story. "The beatings started when I was 7, Chen continued. "At first, it was just when he was really drunk, maybe once or twice a month. But as I got older, it got worse. He would hit me for anything. If I made too much noise, if I didn't clean my room properly, if I looked at him the wrong way." Her voice broke slightly, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "The worst part was that no one believed it could be happening. My father was too well liked in town. When teachers noticed bruises, I learned to lie quickly. I said I fell downstairs, ran into doors, had accidents while playing. I became an expert at hiding the truth." Doc felt his anger building as he listened to her story. He had seen the effects of child abuse before, but hearing it from someone he knew and respected made it even more painful. "When I was 15, things got really bad," Chen said. "My brother tried to protect me one night, and my father put him in the hospital. Broken ribs, concussion, internal bleeding. That's when I finally told someone what was happening." "What did you do?" Doc asked. "I went to the police," Chen replied. "But my father had friends there too. They said there wasn't enough evidence, that it could have been an accident. They warned me about making false accusations against a respected member of the community." Chen's voice became harder, more determined as she continued. "That's when I realized I was on my own. No one was going to save me. If I wanted to survive, I had to become stronger than him. I started learning to fight back, to protect myself and my brother. I trained every day, learning everything I could about self-defense and combat." "How did you finally get away?" Doc asked. "I joined the military the day I turned 18, Chen said. "I lied about my past, created a new identity for myself. I told them I wanted to serve my country, but really, I just wanted to get as far away from my father as possible." Doc began to understand why Chen was so dedicated to her training, why she pushed herself harder than anyone else on the team. She had been preparing for war long before she ever set foot on a battlefield. "The military gave me everything I needed," Chen continued. "Structure, discipline, purpose. I learned that my experiences had actually given me advantages. I could handle pain better than most people. I was naturally suspicious and alert. I could read dangerous situations quickly. But you never dealt with the emotional trauma, Doc observed. Chen nodded slowly. I thought I had buried it deep enough that it wouldn't matter. I became Sarah Chen the SEAL, not Sarah Chen the abused child. I thought I could leave that person behind completely. But today, when you were injured and vulnerable, those old feelings came back, Doc said. Being touched when I couldn't control it, being helpless while someone else had power over my body, Chen whispered. It brought everything back. All those nights when I couldn't fight back. When I had to stay silent to protect my brother. Doc reached out slowly and placed his hand gently on her arm. She tensed for a moment but didn't pull away. You're not that helpless child anymore, he said firmly. You're one of the strongest people I know. But strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone. Chen looked at him with tears in her eyes. I've never told anyone this story before. I was afraid that if people knew the truth, they would think I was damaged, unreliable. The opposite is true, Doc replied. Surviving what you survived and becoming who you are today proves that you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. But you need help processing this trauma, or it's going to keep affecting you in dangerous situations. For the first time since Doc had known her, Chen began to cry. Not the silent tears of someone trying to hide their pain, but the deep, cleansing sobs of someone finally allowing themselves to grieve for the childhood they had lost. Doc stayed with her through the night, understanding that her healing journey was just beginning. The physical wound from the bullet would heal in weeks, but the emotional scars she carried would take much longer to address. As dawn approached, Chen finally fell into a peaceful sleep. Doc realized that her silence during the mission hadn't been weakness at all. It had been the survival mechanism that had kept her alive through years of abuse. But now, for the first time, she had found someone she trusted enough to break that silence. The story of Sarah Chen was far from over, but this night marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would no longer have to face her demons alone. 2 weeks after Chen's injury, she was cleared for light duty, but not yet ready to return to active missions. During her recovery, Doc had convinced her to speak with a military psychologist who specialized in trauma counseling. The sessions were difficult, but Chen was finally beginning to understand how her past was affecting her present. Lieutenant Commander Morrison noticed the change in his communications specialist immediately. Chen was still the dedicated professional she had always been, but there was something different about her demeanor. She seemed more relaxed, less guarded around her teammates. She even began joining them for meals and casual conversations, something she had rarely done before. The real test came 3 weeks later when the team was assigned another high-risk mission. Intelligence reports indicated that a terrorist cell was planning an attack on a nearby coalition base. The SEAL team was tasked with infiltrating their compound and gathering information about the planned assault. Chen insisted she was ready to return to active duty. Doc had his concerns, but her physical recovery was complete, and the psychologist had cleared her for field operations. Morrison decided to give her a chance, but he made sure Doc stayed close during the mission. The compound was located in a mountainous region, accessible only through narrow passes that could easily become kill zones if they were discovered. The team moved in under cover of darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous terrain. Chen carried the advanced communication equipment that would allow them to coordinate with headquarters and call for backup if needed. As they approached the target location, Chen spotted movement on a ridge overlooking their position. 3 armed guards were patrolling the perimeter, their patterns suggesting they were well-trained and alert. Chen quietly relayed this information to Morrison, her voice steady and professional. 2 guards moving east along the ridge. she whispered into her radio. "Third guard stationed at the northwest corner. Recommend we wait for their next patrol cycle before advancing." Morrison smiled to himself as he listened to Chen's report. She was back to her old self, confident and precise in her communications. Whatever she had worked through with the psychologist was clearly helping her function more effectively in the field. The team waited for the right moment, then moved swiftly toward the compound. Chen stayed with Morrison and Doc while the other team members spread out to secure the perimeter. Their objective was to plant listening devices inside the main building and gather any intelligence materials they could find. Everything went smoothly until they were preparing to leave. As the team regrouped at their extraction point, Chen heard something that made her freeze. From somewhere inside the compound came the sound of a child crying, a desperate, terrified sound that cut through the night air like a knife. Doc saw Chen's reaction immediately. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were shaking as she gripped her weapon. The sound of the crying child had triggered memories of her own childhood, of nights when she had cried just as desperately while her father's footsteps approached her bedroom door. "Chen," Doc whispered urgently, "stay with me. Focus on where you are right now." But Chen was already moving toward the compound, her training and her traumatic memories combining in a dangerous way. She had to help that child, even if it meant compromising the mission. Doc caught up with her just as she reached the perimeter fence. "There's a kid in there," Chen said, her voice tight with emotion. "We can't just leave." Morrison's voice crackled through their earpieces. "All units, we have movement to the east. Possible patrol returning to base. We need to extract now." Doc grabbed Chen's arm gently but firmly. "We have orders," he said quietly. "The mission comes first." Chen struggled with the conflict between her military training and her personal demons. Every instinct told her to rescue that child, to prevent another innocent person from suffering the way she had. But she also knew that compromising the mission could endanger her entire team. The crying stopped suddenly, replaced by an ominous silence that was somehow even worse. Chen closed her eyes and took several deep breaths, using the techniques the psychologist had taught her to manage her emotional responses. When she opened her eyes again, the professional soldier was back in control. "You're right," she said to Doc. "Let's go." The team extracted successfully, and their intelligence-gathering mission was considered a complete success. But that night, Chen couldn't sleep. The sound of the crying child haunted her, bringing back all the memories she had been working so hard to process. Doc found her sitting outside her quarters at 3 a.m, staring at the stars. He sat down beside her without saying anything, understanding that sometimes the best support was simply being present. "I almost compromised the mission tonight," Chen said finally. "But you didn't," Doc replied. "You made the right choice, even though it was the hardest thing you've ever had to do." Chen turned to look at him. "How do you carry it, knowing that there are people suffering and you can't save them all?" Doc considered the question carefully. "You save the ones you can," he said, "and you use your experiences to become better at helping others. Your past doesn't have to define you, but it can guide you toward making a positive difference." Over the following months, Chen continued working with the psychologist while maintaining her duties with the SEAL team. She learned to recognize her triggers and developed healthy coping mechanisms for dealing with traumatic memories. More importantly, she began to see her past experiences as a source of strength rather than shame. Chen started volunteering with organizations that helped abused children, using her military training to teach self-defense classes for young women. She shared her story carefully and selectively, always emphasizing that survival was possible and that seeking help was a sign of courage, not weakness. Her teammates gradually learned pieces of her history, not through gossip or speculation, but through her own choice to trust them with her story. They responded with respect and admiration, understanding finally why Chen had always seemed older and wiser than her years. Lieutenant Commander Morrison was particularly impressed by Chen's transformation. She had always been a valuable team member, but now she was also a leader and mentor to younger soldiers who struggled with their own personal challenges. "Chen has become one of our most effective operators," Morrison wrote in his annual evaluation. "Her personal experiences have given her unique insights into human psychology and motivation. She has an exceptional ability to connect with local populations and gather intelligence that others might miss." 2 years after her injury in the Afghan desert, Chen was promoted to Petty Officer First Class and assigned to train new communications specialists. She had found a way to turn her traumatic past into a tool for helping others, breaking the cycle of silence that had once trapped her. Doc remained one of her closest friends and supporters, amazed by her transformation from the silent, wounded soldier he had treated that day in the desert to the confident, compassionate leader she had become. He often thought about how her moment of vulnerability had led to such profound growth and healing. Chen never forgot the sound of the crying child from that night mission, but she channeled that memory into determination to protect others. She knew she couldn't save everyone, but she could make sure that her own survival meant something meaningful. The scars on her body had faded over time, but she no longer tried to hide them. They were part of her story, evidence of battles she had fought and won long before she ever became a SEAL. They reminded her daily that she was stronger than she had ever imagined possible. Her journey from silence to strength had been difficult and painful, but it had also been necessary. Sarah Chen had finally found her voice, and she was using it to make sure that others would never have to suffer in silence the way she once had. The woman who had once been too injured and traumatized to speak had become one of the most respected leaders in her unit, proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes from confronting the deepest wounds and finding the courage to heal.